All right, so ready to jump into the time machine.
Always up for a good time travel adventure.
Because today's deep dive, well, it's kind of a doozy. We're asking, what if Trump wins the next election?
Ah, yes, back to the future with Donald Trump.
And I know everyone's probably got their own hot take.
Definitely a topic that gets people fired up, that's for sure.
But we're going beyond the immediate reactions, right?
Yeah.
Trying to see the long game, what America looks like years, maybe even decades down the line.
Right, thinking about those ripple effects, those things that, well, they might not make the headlines right away, but they can really shape how things unfold.
Exactly. And I've been doing some digging, got a whole pile of expert predictions, analysis, all that good
A
stuff.
mountain of data, I bet. It can be tough to sift through all that and make sense of it.
That's why I'm glad you're here. Someone to help me sort through this potential future.
Happy to be your co-pilot on this one. It's definitely a journey into the unknown.
Okay, so let's set the scene, all right? It's 2028. We wake up, grab our coffee. Hopefully it hasn't become some luxury item because of trade wars, but we'll get to that. What's different? What's the first thing people notice?
Well, one of the first things that could feel really different is healthcare. You know, a lot of our sources are suggesting big changes to the Affordable Care Act.
Yeah, overhaul, replacement. I even saw some folks predicting it could be, well, gone, poof.
And that's huge. We're talking about millions of Americans who rely on the ACA for health insurance. So yeah, that would be a major shift.
Imagine trying to get your prescription filled or see your doctor, and the whole system's just different. It's a bit unsettling.
And it's not just healthcare, right? There are other areas where we see change right off the bat.
Absolutely. Immigration is another one. A lot of the predictions point to stricter border security.
Oh yeah, I bet that wall is back on the table.
It very well could be. And it's not just the physical barriers. Think changes to visa programs, making it harder to come here to work or study. And for folks who are already here, especially undocumented immigrants.
Yeah, a whole new level of uncertainty, that's for sure.
Okay, let's shift gears for a second.
Mm.
What about the environment? You know, the air we breathe, the water we drink, all that good stuff. What does that look like in this potential future?
Well, this is where things get really complicated. You know, Trump's been pretty vocal about his stance on climate change.
Yeah, not exactly a champion for the Green New Deal.
Right. And a lot of our sources are predicting a possible withdrawal from those international climate agreements and a shift back towards fossil fuels.
So basically, we're hitting reverse on all that progress we've made.
Potentially, yeah. Some sources even suggest a rollback of environmental protection laws, which could have an impact on everything from, you know, air quality to conservation efforts.
So it's not just political debates anymore. We're talking about the air we breathe potentially changing.
Yeah, it's a pretty big deal.
Definitely some food for thought there. But, you know, we can't forget about our wallets. What happens to the average person's finances in this potential future?
Well, you know, trade wars were a big theme during Trump's first term, especially with China. And our sources suggest this could intensify.
More tariffs, more trade disputes.
Potentially. And that could have a real impact on prices, everything from electronics to even basic things like clothing. Just think about the stuff you buy every day and how much it costs. That could all shift.
So it's like this ripple effect. One policy change leads to another, and suddenly, you know, we're paying twice as much for our groceries.
It's certainly a possibility, but it's not all doom and gloom. Some experts predict a boost in certain industries, like manufacturing.
Oh, okay. So maybe some job growth in those sectors.
Potentially, yeah. But then again, there are always trade-offs, right? Green energy, for example, might face a slowdown in investments, which could mean fewer jobs in that sector.
So it's not just about who wins the election, but understanding how those policies could reshape the entire economy. Okay, so we've covered healthcare, immigration, the environment, the economy. What are we missing?
Well, we can't forget about the Supreme Court.
Ah, right, the backbone of democracy. I know it sounds kind of dry, but trust me, this is where things get really interesting.
Absolutely. This is about long-term change, not just immediate headlines. With potential appointments by President Trump, the court could have a much more conservative leaning for decades.
We're talking potential changes to, like, the very foundation of American law. Roe v. Wade, gun control, all that.
Exactly. And those decisions, well, they could echo through the legal system for a generation, maybe even longer.
Okay, but it's not just about laws and policies, right?
Yeah.
It's about people. How does all of this impact the everyday lives of Americans? How does it feel to live in this world?
Well, that's where we start to see the potential for increased polarization, I guess you could say. Remember the atmosphere during Trump's first term. A lot of our sources suggest we could see even more division, maybe even more activism and protests.
So picture this. Protests in the streets, Twitter wars exploding, families arguing at Thanksgiving dinner.
It's definitely a possibility.
And this tension, this division, it doesn't just stay within America, right?
Yeah.
It spills out onto the global stage,
Mhm.
affects relationships with allies, with rivals.
Right, because if America's divided internally, how effectively can it really lead on a global scale?
Okay, so we've got this potential internal pressure cooker, but what about, like, the global power dynamics? Let's talk U.S.-China relations. Things are already pretty strained during Trump's first term. What do our sources say about this potential future?
Well, they're suggesting the possibility of continued tension, maybe even conflict in some areas. Think technology, military positioning.
Oh, right. So all those flashpoints, the race for AI, the whole South China Sea thing, even the potential for cyber warfare.
It's all on the table, potentially.
So it's not just about tweets and trade deals anymore. We're talking about stuff that could reshape the entire global power balance. And what about America's traditional allies? You know, the NATO countries and all that.
Yeah, well, remember those debates about burden sharing, the idea that other NATO members need to step up, contribute more financially and militarily. Well, our sources suggest those debates could come back with a vengeance under a second Trump administration.
So instead of this united front, we could see cracks in those alliances, maybe even some countries saying, hey, we're going our own way.
It's definitely within the realm of possibility.
Okay. Deep breaths, everybody. We've gone from healthcare to protests, trade wars to, like, global power shifts. And we're just getting started.
That's right. We've only just dipped our toes into this potential future. There's so much more to unpack how this all plays out in different industries, what it means for people's daily lives. It's a complex web for sure.
Okay, before we go any further, I need to remind everyone, we're not fortune tellers. We're just exploring potential outcomes based on what the experts are saying.
Right.
Informed speculation, basically.
Exactly. The future is inherently uncertain, but by exploring these possibilities, grappling with the what-ifs, we can at least get a better grasp of what might be coming our way.
And maybe even figure out how to navigate it, right?
Exactly. Because understanding the potential challenges and opportunities, well, that's the first step towards making informed choices and shaping the future we want. It's like we're looking through this foggy window into this future, trying to make sense of all the shapes and shadows. But the closer we get, the more those details start to come into focus.
Okay, so we've got this kind of, like, broad overview of what America might look like under a second Trump term, right?
Mm-hmm.
The policies, the economy, the whole vibe. But our sources, they go deeper. They start digging into the inner workings, the legal battles, the potential investigations. It gets kind of House of Cards, to be honest.
Yeah, it's when we start to see the potential for lasting change, like the stuff that really sticks. For example, there's been a lot of talk about these ongoing legal issues surrounding Trump and how a potential victory could impact those.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. Some legal experts were even saying that he might be immune from certain prosecutions while in office. It makes
Right.
you wonder, what does that mean for accountability? Is the president above the law?
That's the big question, isn't it? And then there's the potential for influence on the Department of Justice. Some folks are worried that a second Trump administration might try to, exert more control over the DOJ.
Right, so maybe impacting those ongoing investigations. Or even starting new ones, targeting political rivals.
This is definitely something to consider.
Okay, but let's zoom out a bit, back to everyday life. Our sources also talk about potential changes to how Trump might approach things like cybersecurity and infrastructure.
Yeah.
What's the word on the street there?
Well, there's a lot of chatter about a potential increase in surveillance, maybe even new regulations on those big tech companies.
More cameras, more tracking, that kind of thing.
Potentially, yeah. And some experts even think there might be this renewed focus on space exploration, which, could be exciting, but it also makes you think about priorities and funding.
Right. Like, if national security becomes the main focus, will we see more spending on defense and intelligence? Maybe even at the expense of other programs like education or healthcare.
Exactly. It's all about trade-offs.
And those trade-offs, they don't just happen on government level, right? They trickle down and affect individual lives.
Right. Think about it. If there's this huge surge in military spending, where does that money come from? What gets cut?
It's all connected, isn't it? It's like this giant puzzle with all these interlocking pieces. Speaking of connections, what about social movements? Would a potential Trump victory energize certain groups? Maybe even lead to more activism or protests?
I think that's certainly possible. I mean, historically, social movements often gain momentum when they feel like, they're being threatened or things are unjust.
Right, so it wouldn't be surprising to see a surge in activism, especially from those groups focused on social justice, climate change, immigration rights, all of that.
Exactly. People find ways to make their voices heard.
Okay, so imagine that energy, that passion being channeled into action. Would it lead to positive change, or would it just make those divides even deeper?
It's a tough question. Not an easy answer.
But it's something we need to think about,
Mm.
okay? But let's not forget about one thing that impacts pretty much everyone, regardless of their political views: the economy. We touched on trade wars earlier, but there's this whole universe of potential economic shifts to consider. Inflation, job growth, taxes, all that good stuff.
Yeah, the stuff that hits everybody's wallet.
Right. How much our groceries cost, whether we can afford a house, if we can even keep up with the rising cost of living. These are the things that people worry about.
Absolutely.
So what do the experts say about how a potential Trump administration might tackle these economic challenges?
Well, some economists are predicting more tax cuts, especially for corporations and those higher earners. The idea is to stimulate the economy, but some folks are worried it'll just widen that gap between the rich and the poor.
So the rich get richer, and everyone else is left wondering if they can even afford gas to get to work.
It's a concern, yeah.
And what about inflation? It's already a big problem for a lot of people, and it doesn't seem to be going away anytime soon. What would a potential Trump administration do about that?
Well, that's a tough one. Would they focus on interest rates, try to control prices, or maybe try something completely different? It's hard to say for sure.
But whatever they do, it's going to have a ripple effect, right?
Definitely. And we can't ignore the impact on different industries. We talked about that potential growth in manufacturing, right? Well, that could mean job creation in some areas, but it also might mean job losses in others as companies adapt to these changing policies and the global market.
It's a lot to wrap our heads around. And we're still just scratching the surface here. Our sources go even deeper, talking about education, healthcare, even cultural shifts. It's like peeling back layers of an onion. And with every layer, there's this new complexity.
But even though it's complex, it's not impossible to understand. The key is to avoid getting overwhelmed by all the information. Instead, we should focus on identifying those key themes, those big ideas, and connecting them to the larger picture.
Okay, so let's try to do that. One theme that keeps popping up is this idea of polarization, whether it's political, social, or even economic. It seems like a second Trump term would likely exacerbate those divisions.
And that brings us to a really important question. How does a nation that's already struggling with these deep divisions, how does it navigate such a turbulent period? How do we find common ground when the very foundations of our society seem to be shifting?
It's like we're standing at this crossroads, with all these paths leading into an uncertain future. Some of those paths might lead to progress and prosperity, while others, well, they might lead to conflict and instability.
But here's the important thing. We're not just passive observers. We have choices. We have a voice, and we have the power to shape that future. And understanding these potential outcomes, the good and the bad, is the first step toward making informed choices and taking action.
All right, well, we've made it. Through this potential future, anyway. Explored the twists and turns, the ups and downs of a possible second Trump term. Whew, it's been a lot, hasn't it?
It really has. A whirlwind of information, that's for sure.
We've talked policy changes, social movements, the economy, the whole global scene. And honestly, I got to say, it's been a little overwhelming at times. But knowledge is power, right? Even if some of this stuff seems like, a long shot, it makes us think, doesn't it? But the world we live in, the choices we make.
Absolutely. It's like holding a mirror up to society and asking, is this really what we want?
Right. And if it's not, well, what are we
Yeah.
going to do about it? That's the real question.
It's not about just accepting things as they are. It's about understanding how things work and then, using that knowledge to make informed choices.
So, okay, we've talked about the big picture, the potential for chaos and change. But now I want to bring it back to you, the listener. What if all this actually happened? How would you deal with this new reality? Personally, professionally?
Yeah. How do you navigate that?
Exactly. Do you lean in? Do you push back? Do you find some completely different path altogether?
This is where things get really interesting because it's not just about taking in information. It's about applying it to your own life.
Right. Like, okay, let's say you're worried about the economy, right? Maybe you start diversifying your investments or you learn new skills just in case.
Or maybe you're really passionate about a certain issue. So you get involved, maybe you join a group, start volunteering, something like that.
It's like we're not just along for the ride. We can actually steer the ship. you know?
You're not just a passenger, you're the captain.
I like that. And that's got to be empowering, right? To know that even when things are uncertain, we still have a choice.
Exactly. And that choice, it has more weight when you're informed, when you understand what's going on around you. And it's not about having all the answers. It's about asking questions, challenging what you think you know,
Hmm.
hearing different perspectives.
All right, so as we wrap up this deep dive, a couple of final thoughts. First, we're not fortune tellers. We don't know the future.
No crystal ball here.
Right. This is all based on what experts are saying. Things could go in a totally different direction.
Uh-huh.
Second, don't let the complexity get you down. Focus on what you can control, you know? Take action where you can. And finally, never stop learning, never stop questioning, never stop engaging with the world. Because ultimately, the future is what we make it. It's up to all of us to shape what comes next.
Beautifully said. And remember, even if some of this stuff seemed a little scary, it also highlights those areas where we're vulnerable, but also where there are opportunities. And by understanding that, by being aware, well, we become better citizens. We can be active participants in building the world we want to live in. The future's unwritten, and that's both exciting and a little daunting, but it's our story to write.